think for people who kind of get into that like panic mode of I don't know where else to turn, you're more powerful than you think. Like everyone has like that intuition and that connection with their animals. And I think they give away some of that power thinking that they can't do it themselves. You know what I mean?
I've been a horse trainer for over 15 years. In that time, I had a lot of life changes that inspired me to look a little bit deeper into the gaps that I believe are in this industry and the way we interact with our animals. What I found is that they have been huge in being able to help people shift their perspective, completely shift their energy, and really thrive in their relationships. Hey everybody, welcome to today's Mirror in the Stall. Today we have Shayleigh Evans. Hello Shayleigh, thank you for hanging out with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I was told by Celeste how I definitely needed to connect with you and talk with you. And I started seeing your stuff on social media and I was like, yes, love her. So I really wanted to be able to share you with people that had not seen your stuff before and sort of a little bit about your journey and what you do. So I think starting out with like first of all, describe what it is you do. Like, what do you say that you do?
Oh, I call myself an animal communicator, but I'm actually kind of feeling like that's not the right term for me these days, so it might change this year. But basically, I talk to animals. So I look at a picture and I have found that I can connect to an animal's energy. And sometimes I don't even need the picture, but basically I can tune my energetic frequency to that of an animal. And I can experience what they're feeling. I can pick up on their emotions. They can show me symbols and words. And that's pretty much primarily what I do.
And so the story of how like you sort of came into being this, because I feel like nowadays it's not such a far-fetched thing for people to go, oh yeah, this is what I do. Like it feels like there's been a shift where it's just sort of, yeah, that's what happens with this. This is this person's gift. But I know it didn't feel like that very much like a while ago. So how is that? How did that journey look for you? Like, I keep wanting to say coming out of the closet.
You know, what's crazy is I used to call it that. And what's hilarious is that I talked to this psychic one time and she was like, I don't know if you're like questioning your sexuality, but I keep hearing coming out of the closet. And I was like, no, that is my business. Because for the longest time, it's like a weird thing to say. And then, you know, there's so much like speculation around it. And like, I don't want to be that girl who like shows up to my husband's work party and everyone's like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm like a horse therapist. I talk to horses. And then, you know, it ends up taking over the whole night. And so for
people
the
waving their pictures of their animals at you.
Yeah, or they think it's really, or you get people that are like interesting and they like walk the other way. Like it was kind of a weird thing for me for a while. So for a couple of years, like even after I started my business, for random people who just asked what I do, I would be like, oh, I work for Marriott, even though I quit like 3 years ago. But it was just such an easy thing to just say. But yeah, my animal communication journey started with one horse, really. I mean, I feel like my personal journey started a long time before that, but like the horse that I have today is the one that really kind of led me to all of that. And I don't know if you want to hear his story or not, but
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So his name's Kip, and I had just gotten I was like a couple months out of doing this like working student internship at a dressage barn in Florida. And my husband and I were like driving up to North Carolina, and I just happened to like get on Facebook, and I was like scrolling for horses, and I found the Winter Farm OTTV rescue, and I started looking at their page, and I saw this mare that I really liked. So I called the lady. We ended up like stopping there to check her out. We pulled her out of the stall, and she was like dead lame, like completely lame. And the lady was like, wow, this is so weird. She's never taken a lame step here. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. So we like walked around the farm to like check out the other horses, and Kip and another horse came like galloping up. And I was like, let me just check out this little bay with a star. And he was such a shithead. And like at the time, I really like, I had not even started my like personal growth yet. Like I didn't know anything. I got him out. He was like jigging and rearing. He bit me a bunch of times. He like kept kicking out at me when I was trying to take his blanket off. And like, he was just like a total disaster. And I was like, I'll take him. Like something about him just like made me want to take him. And my sister-in-law came with me, and my husband was there, and they were both like, are you sure? Like, I don't know. Maybe you should get a horse that's like, you know, a little bit further along. And I was like, no, there's something about him. And it's just so crazy because that one little decision, like it blows my mind thinking back that if I would have decided not to take him, or if that other horse wouldn't have been lame, I don't think I would have ever, I don't know if I would have become a communicator, or it was literally that one decision that was like a catalyst to everything. Because, he got diagnosed with kissing spine like probably 8 months later. I tried to give him back because I was like a young kid who I was like, I don't know how to deal with this, and I don't really want to. Mm-hmm. And the lady at the rescue was like, you committed to this horse, like you need to see it through. And she wouldn't let me give him back. And I was like, well, then I'm just going to retire him. And he's only 7 years old. And I was like crying all the time, crying to my friends. And I randomly ended up going to meet a saddle fitter, Leanne Rogers, and she really helped me and guided me and was like talking to me about his energy and was like, you need to see Dr. Mailer, who's a vet osteopath in Florida. And she was a major catalyst because she basically told me that I know nothing. Like she was like, yeah, I don't really care what you know about riding. Like you need to educate yourself. You don't know the structures of the feet. Your feet look like shit. Your horse's back looks like shit. Like you need to educate yourself. And I was like, sir, yes, sir. So she really helped me to like, and she was so generous too. Like she fixed my horse and I couldn't afford any of it. And she was just amazing. Like she really helped me. And then she introduced me to Dr. Cindy Allen, who is a vet in Florida also. And she does teeth. She specializes in teeth and feet. And she spent like hours and days and months teaching me how to trim him. And she let me practice on her own horses. And I mean, she gave me like a huge, huge gift of like, not only understanding the teeth balance, but especially with the feet. And I feel like her lessons are like one of the main reasons my horses are like sound today. And part of why I got into communication, because I started really listening to him with the feet. Like I kept saying, I would always get in trouble because I'd be like, I feel this. And she'd be like, no feeling. What are the facts? And I'm like, I don't know. I swear he's telling me like, do this. But so yeah, so through kind of rehabbing him, I was finding all the parts and pieces, and something still wasn't adding up. Like he was still super freaking back sore, and I was just missing the energetic component and all this stuff. So he kind of started guiding me into like talking to him and figuring out like saddle fit and stuff like that. So that was kind of like my main catalyst into it. And then I started just practicing on other people's horses, like my friends, anyone who wouldn't think I was crazy. I'd be like, hey, can I talk to your horse, and will you let me know this is true?
Am I right?
Yeah. And I mean, I started out too, like typing up the information or like texting it and then like deleting the text and being like, man, I hope they don't write me back. Like, I don't want to hear if I was wrong or right. I just want to send the info.
And so, yeah, it's so interesting that when you start anything, it's like once you start getting the validation, it's sort of like, okay, maybe I'll go a little bit longer. Okay, maybe I'll go a little bit longer. Do you feel like it's something that you're more confident in it now, or do you still have those moments where you're like, oh, I hope this is right?
I'm definitely a lot more confident. And I think one of the biggest things on like knowing if it's right or wrong is I've kind of had to tell myself that like once I set the intention and like deliberately connect with the animal, there is no wrong. It could be that I'm interpreting it one way and the person needs to hear it a different way. And like sometimes people will say, oh, I understand where you're coming from, but could it be this? And I'd be like, oh yeah, that's definitely like, you know, because it's all kind of open to interpretation. Right. So I don't feel like there's necessarily anything wrong. And that's something for people who are kind of practicing on their own and with their own animals, like you really can't get it wrong. If it doesn't resonate with you right away, it's probably just because you're picking up like the essence of that thought. It's just you need to go a little bit further or in a different direction, and then it'll kind of all come together.
Right. So before you do a session, you just sit and set that intention. Do you have a specific intention that you set, or is it just whatever comes to you that day?
Yeah, it's kind of whatever comes to me after I look at the animal. So like usually I'll like open up my email, look at the animal, and I'll be like, okay, I get like an initial energy of them, like whether they're struggling, whether they're happy or thriving or whatever. So like based on their initial energy, I will set an intention. So like I'll meditate for like 10 or 15 minutes, and then I set the intention for, you know, healing. Or sometimes like the animal always knows what the person wants to hear for the most part. And they'll know if their reading needs to be funny and lighthearted, or if I need to say like, hold on, like I still do like typed readings every once in a while for people who are on different schedules than me. And I did a typed reading for her the other day, and I was like, this is going to be like some heavy stuff. So like prepare. And then it was this like 3 pages of like lots of heavy stuff. So they typically know like how it's going to go. And I base my intention on that.
Yeah. I always wonder, because I spend so much time with my 3, and I'm like, for people that this is what I think, because I'm definitely going to have you do my horses. And yeah. And so my thought is always like, and I wonder if this is sort of like this for other people, or if they express this to you, like, I hope they don't say anything bad about me.
That happens all the time. They hope that they don't say anything bad. And actually the story that comes to mind with that 2 things that come to mind. Usually they don't say anything bad. They have really good constructive criticism. Unless you seriously offend them. Like I have this one dog one time that was literally like, anytime I lay on my person's lap, they fart. And I'm so offended by that. And I'm like, which is so funny to hear, because like, you know, dogs are kind of doing that all the time. But that is just one that's out in my mind. And then there's this other one where, and they usually don't show me their people naked. They don't show anything like they're pretty good about like censoring stuff, but this one reading is like burned into my mind, because this horse was so offended that this lady did a naked photo shoot on him and showed me everything, and I will never forget it. So sometimes they do like, and then of course the person was like, I cannot believe that he showed you that. Like that is so embarrassing. And they normally don't do stuff like that. Like they won't embarrass their people for the most part, but he was so offended. I was like, well, I guess you're never going to do that again, because he was offended.
That's so good. Oh, it's so good. Yeah. I think about that, right? What a good accountability partner you are in relationships with people that use your services, because it's like, you're going to be much more conscious if you know they're going to talk to Shaylee later. It's like this like thought of when you start to really realize this is what's going on for them. They are conscious, they are aware, and sometimes I think I stay more aware of it because I'm working with so many different horses every day, and a lot of them aren't mine. So I have to become really present, and I do become aware of that. But sometimes when it's your own horse, it feels like some of that stuff sort of gets a little bit diluted. And then I think about it when I'm really even thinking about having this call with you, and thinking about the way I am with my horses, and the things I say and what I do, and the things I say to people to do and say with their horses. And I'm like, I wonder like how many things I am just unconscious about that I do with them that I'm more conscious with other horses. And then I start to get really present when I'm with them, like, we are going to set an appointment with Shaylee. So I really know this is something I do to them, you know? And so it's an interesting, because I was like, yep, Shaylee's like the accountability partner. It's going to be the one that's like, hey, you know what I know?
Yeah, that is true. And I mean, my own animals hold me accountable too. Like they'll totally check me. And a funny story just popped up due to that, because like I never thought about people like thinking that way, like, oh, I don't want to do this because like what if Shaylee knows about it? And when I first met my friend Donna, I talked to her Mustangs, and what her mare literally showed her like lifting her tail. She's like 4'11" and a half. I know she's gonna watch this, so I have to add in the half. She's small, and she's like the level of like their tail. And the horse literally was like, she is so invasive, and showed her lifting up her tail and like looking at her vag, like her eye, like right in there, and was like, what is she doing? And I told her that, and she was like, oh my God, that is so embarrassing. Like, I'm making sure there's not ticks in, like, she was just totally, but it is funny, some of the stuff that they will show me, but for the most part, you know, what's interesting too about that is sometimes I will tell people something that the horse feels that they're doing under saddle, and the person will be like, I'm not doing that. And I'm like, well, I have no reason to make it up. Like, there's no, they'll be like, oh, I'm super, like, it'll be something with a contact or something. And the person will be like, oh, no, I'm really light in the reins. I ride like very light and, you know, whatever. And that's always interesting to me when I have people that think that way, that it's not that they're thinking what I'm saying is wrong, but they'll totally get like defensive about it, which don't get me wrong. I know it's kind of hard to hear sometimes, some of the stuff. Mm-hmm. So I'm like very honest.
Yeah, it's such a cool thing, like a lens to be able to see things through, you know, knowing that they're having that validation that you get, you know, from sessions with people, and having, you know, like health issues and medical issues that you can't figure out. Like I'm always thinking about mine too, that have navicular. I'm like, they look sound, are their feet comfortable? And it comes up all the time for me. And I'm like, if I keep thinking it, is it because they're not, and they're just equally lame? Like, and it runs through my head all the time. And so to be able to say, hey, I'm going to call somebody and be like, hey, have them tell me about like, where are they good in their body and where they aren't, you know, is like such an amazing, like, you know, gift to be able to like call on somebody and have them show up like that for the horses is so good. So do you have any stories that like medical stuff where people are like, we can't figure this out? I'm sure you do. We can't figure this out, or
those stories are probably, yeah, I have a few of those. The one that comes to mind first is actually a dog that I talked to who had blastomycosis, and I had no idea what it was, and it literally like led me through googling the symptoms, and like it was so weird. So I talked to her, and her person was also very intuitive and was like, I know her medical condition, but I just need to know, like, is there anything else that's like bothering her? And so I went through the dog's body, and I could pick up fungus because I have a symbol for that. And then it went like directly to her lungs, and I was like, okay, there's some sort of fungus in her lungs. And she just kept saying more. You need to like tell her more. And so then I was like, okay, can I get, sometimes like the readings are like an experiment. So I was like, okay, can I figure out a word? Can I do? And then I just saw like BL. So then I started Googling like fungus with BL. Anyway, it led me to blastomycosis. And when I messaged her person, she was like, she got diagnosed with blastomycosis, and the lungs are the only thing we haven't radiographed. And she took her to the vet like a week later, and her lungs were just like full of the fungus. And it ended up being like too much to kind of bring her back from. But that was like super gnarly for me because I didn't know what it was. And the dog like knew enough to kind of like guide me to figuring it out, which I thought was kind of cool.
That's crazy.
I know, it was super crazy. What's interesting is sometimes animals just want to be like, they just want you to acknowledge like how they feel, you know? So I talked to a stallion not too long ago who was having trouble breeding mare, like he wasn't getting anything pregnant.
Mhm.
And he was like telling me that he was biased about chestnut mares because he got kicked by one. And his person was literally like, he will not go near a chestnut mare. Like he totally got kicked and he's like gun shy. And basically he was just like, you know what, live cover, it stresses me out. That one horse like broke my heart. Like he's like, I'm so sensitive. And like that one horse like traumatized me. And so she's like, okay, we'll do everything AI. And just telling him that, like me just being able to say, you will never do live cover again, bam, got 4 mares pregnant. The vet called her and was like, I don't know what happened to your horse, but he's a dream to like lead. And it's almost like he's sedated. Like he just turned into a completely different horse. So sometimes like, stories like that are totally cool because it's just like that mental component, just knowing that like their people are listening to them is like totally badass.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's so good. So there's been several podcasts that I've done with different people, and I always bring up the topic of soul contracts. Was that you that posted somebody who'd written a book or something, or is that somewhere completely different?
I like Tammy Billups. She's not soul contract. She does something else. I'm trying to think of what her book is called right now, but I know what you mean. Like this, I've read the soul contracts book.
Yeah, so I haven't really done anything beyond, but intuitively I'm sort of like, I feel like they at some level choose us. They're here for us for, you know, for some reason. There's some sort of fulfillment that happens within the relationship. Is that something that you feel like is valid, or what is their perspective on that?
I usually call it like their lesson. That's what they'll say. That's what they'll guide me to say, is they'll be like, my lesson for you is, or every animal has like a lesson for us. And oftentimes in my sessions, like especially if animals are having like a really hard time, they'll say, well, my lesson isn't in you showing me or this or that, it's in forgiveness or whatever. And some of them will elaborate and some of them won't, but yeah, they totally know that they're on like a little path. And
Mhm.
even the horses who have been abused and stuff, it's crazy because a lot of times they'll say, I chose that because that was what the people around me like needed to, you know, have at the time. And then I also chose this. And so they know that like they're kind of deliberate creators of their experience for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah, and that's what I also wondered, because I think it was that same post, and I don't know where I saw it, if it wasn't on your page, but it was that the horses will hang on to whatever issue they have until their person has sort of learned the lesson that needed to be learned from it. So even if maybe the physical ailments aren't there or whatever it is, like the behavior will stay until the person has really learned whatever lesson it was around it. And I just thought that was really interesting. And that I do believe that we all choose. And so when people ask me about like lesson horses, well, they always look so sad. And I'm like, but they chose that, you know, and they're doing what they need to do to be able to do their job. And so instead of trying to shift myself away from being so sad for all these animals that go through all these things, and, you know, because then I'm like, oh my God, I can't do this. Or being like, no,
Yeah.
there's a choice, right? Yeah.
That is something that I kind of struggle with because on one end, and I'm sure you struggle with this too, like you want to see the horse as like whole and complete and happy, you know, and then you see some of like the outside, but how much of that is projection, you know what I mean? And that's what's cool about animal communication is some lesson horses that I talk to don't particularly enjoy it, but a lot of them do. And what I love about talking to lesson horses is that they can start to tell the people what type of riders they want. So like I work with a couple lesson barns and certain horses are only used for a certain style of rider because that's what their preference is. And they don't have to do the other stuff anymore. So that's what's kind of cool about doing a session for a lesson horse, because they'll be like, oh, I just like a rider who, you know, prefers to go fast and do the jumpers. I don't want to do the hunters. And so then the program will kind of shift them over there. So that's kind of cool. But Yeah, going back to like the lessons that we need to learn, sometimes I think it's not necessarily just one horse, because that horse that was lame when I got Kip, she tried to come back into my life, and I got radiographs of her and she had a keratoma, and I was like, you know what? I just don't think I'm equipped. Like I'm pretty confident in my hoof trimming skills, but I don't know if I know how to deal with a horse with like a hoof deformity. Well, then one of my horses died and I got another horse, and what do you know? He has a freaking keratoma in the front foot. And I'm like, well, I gotta learn that lesson. And that's years later. Like that's like 2 or 3 years later, and I get this freaking keratoma horse. And that's not a common thing, I feel like. I mean, I don't run across it that often.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I think of too. When I have people that will have a horse, and usually by the time they make it to me, they're sort of like either coming from another trainer, or they're sort of like, I don't know what else to do. Like, this is the last, I'm the last resort. And I see these people and I see a path that all of it could unravel and it could be very successful together. But then I hear them they'll stop short, and it's like, well, maybe I'll just sell this horse. And my thing always is with them is like, you're going to sell this horse, but you are going to get this lesson in another horse, a relationship, a dog. Like, this lesson is coming for you. So you might as well sort it out, because it's right here in front of us right now.
That is so true. I always say you take yourself with you wherever you go. So like if you're not happy now, just going, here, you're taking that same self with you, unless you do like the inner work to kind of change your vibration around it. Definitely.
Yeah. And how do you feel? So this is kind of a topic that people get like about with the lameness stuff, or horses that are constantly getting hurt, or constantly there's always something wrong. The vet is always there. But I feel like sometimes they are with owners that are hyper like aware of everything. And I'm like, is there a correlation, or am I crazy? Because I see it and I'm like, why is there's a little scratch. Oh God, there's wraps around the body. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean? Like one little thing and it's like the world is falling apart. We don't know if he's going to be okay. And I'm like, I would probably just ignore that for a week and then come back later and it would be fine. So is there a correlation between those things, do you feel?
Yeah, I think that's kind of twofold. A lot of times those horses too, I feel like don't get enough turnout or enough time to like actually be a horse. Like just in my experience, thinking of like some of the ones I remember that are that way, it's like they get their 2 hours of turnout and then they come in, and if they run, they come in. And so that creates like a lot of like energetic imbalances in their body, just not being able to like move around and move that energy and like be a horse. But there is something to be said about people who are hyper focused on, I mean, shit, that's how I got into animal communication. I was constantly touching Kip's back, and like it was always sore and I was always crying about it. And the next thing you know, he's got a tendon injury, and then he has a broken splint, and like that is literally how I got into communication. He got a fractured face, and then finally he was like, will you just quit looking at me? Like, stop touching me, stop looking at me. And so for like a year, I just hand grazed him, and I was like, okay, I don't know what to do, but it's not what I'm doing. So yeah, the more attention you bring to a certain area, the more, I feel like the more it gets exacerbated. And the opposite of that, I have this amazing client whose horse fractured his pelvis. Like he was rolling underneath the fence, fractured his pelvis. And she was like, I don't know what to do. Do I put him down? And he was like, my mind is so strong. I feel like I'm going to recover, but you have to do the mental work to help me recover. And I was like, I think you need to do a gratitude journal. I think you need to just see him in love and light and really see him as whole and see the end result. And she put in the work, and he fully recovered within a year. Like, and she, of course, she did like some taping and cupping and like PEMF and stuff like that. But the main thing that he knew was that she was giving like the positive energy to that relationship. So it kind of goes both ways.
Yeah, that's really cool. Very, very cool.
Because people will sometimes try to be like, oh, well, your horse never gets hurt because he's a quarter horse and I have a thoroughbred. And I'm like, no, that's not a thing. Like, that is not a thing.
Oh, I was just talking to Tammy yesterday, and I don't even know how we got on this topic, but we were talking about, horses and their preferences, and how we're so unconscious about that stuff. Like, it's funny, a lot of humans are just so, well, I bought my horse this friend, so he should be happy now, and she's like, well, what if your horse doesn't like that horse? And I'm like, what? And you think about how that affects everything that they do. And then I started thinking about, well, yeah, it's like a roommate moving in next to you at like at a barn, and your horse comes in and you hate the roommate, and the roommate is super annoying, and you have to live with the roommate and you don't get a choice, and we were kind of thinking about that. I'm like, yeah, that piece alone is like, of course that affects them. So do you feel like that's something that you get told, like with other horses, that they have to like be around?
It's so a lot of times it's the opposite, where they really love another horse and the person's like, oh, they're too attached, and pull them away. Yeah. And then it's like really traumatizing for that horse. Or something that comes to mind is I talked to a horse the other day, and she was like, I don't understand why he's so frantic in the stall. And I was like, well, his stall's on the left side and he can't see his friends. But because he had to come in the barn like on his own for a little bit for whatever reason. And I was like, he's asking if you could just move him to the right side of the barn so that he could see the pasture. He would eat his hay, he'd be fine. And she was like, well, I don't want that side. The stalls aren't as nice. I already did a bunch of work to this stall. And I like kind of sat there for a second, because this is someone who really does love her horse. And it was just kind of crazy to me that I was like, she said that the stalls like flood a little bit in the rain, but it just was interesting that like she wasn't even willing to like entertain the idea. And it's like something so small that would like make that situation a little bit better. But yeah, usually I find that it's the opposite, where they'll be really happy or attached to another horse, and that horse will get taken away.
Yeah, I always think about that stuff, because we have some training horses that will come in, and mine are in one big pasture together and the borders are sort of separate. And my herd is pretty stable, so they have horses come in and out and it doesn't really disrupt much, and I always wonder, because some of them come and they just like, we really like him and we want him to stay. And I'm like, he's only going to be here for a little while. And it makes me feel a little bit bad, but I'm like, so, realizing that stuff is so relevant to them. And we have one horse here that is my friend of mine, who I think they're 8 now. So our horses are about the same age. So I had mine at my house, and I had started her horse for her, and they knew each other very, very shortly, and that was 6 years ago, 7 years ago. I think they're 9 now, actually. And she just brought him here for the winter, and they saw each other, and I was like, they totally remember each other, and my older gelding too. And it was just like, it's just such a trip to think of them like that, because I think sometimes people lose sight of that stuff when they get so wrapped up in the performance stuff, and then the showing, and then the things. And I'm like, these beings have like all of this stuff going on, and they're so disregarded, it feels like sometimes. It's just really crazy to me to think of that. Yeah. So do you have any other stories that you want to share that kind of stand out as just fun for you to tell?
I talked to a cat the other day who was crossed over and just kind of like validating stuff for her person. And I thought it was, I don't remember the majority of the reading, but something that kind of stands out is that she was like, you have to show her white flowers because she loves white flowers. And the lady was like, oh my gosh, I used to own a flower shop and white flowers are my favorite. And the cat was like, you used to have them on the table all the time and you don't anymore. And I think you should really like get some in memory of me, because that's how I'll visit you, is through white flowers. And I was like, oh, that's so nice. And then the cat was like, but I don't want a cheap vase. I want that really nice, heavy vase that's got like all kinds of different, like she showed it having all this detail on it. It was crystal, and the cat was all, and it's really expensive. And she's like, oh my gosh, we only have one. It was a wedding gift. It's super expensive. And the cat totally like knew to like gravitate towards that. And I was like, well, what better validation could you get that like I'm talking to your animal?
Right.
And the same thing happened with a cow like several months ago. I talked to this cow, and it's just crazy some of the details that they'll bring up to like validate for their people. Like she talked about how she had this like really nice leather halter, And one time the crown piece broke and the girl like replaced it with a piece of rope. And the girl was like, holy crap, like, how is she bringing that up? It's so cool, like that they know just like little tiny things like that, like their people need to hear.
Right.
I talked to a house chicken.
You said
That one was funny. The little chicken that like lives in the house, and she actually really enjoyed it, but she came to me. I was not even trying to connect with her. I was in the shower actually, and usually that doesn't happen to me because I feel like I usually sit down, deliberately connect, shut off my energy, and then like I'm ready to go for the day. And for whatever reason, my energy must have still been open, and this chicken was like, I'm gonna need you to message my person immediately because I used to have this little dog bed that was like, you know, like one of those cat ones that are like a little egg shape, like the little bowl shape. She showed me that and she was like, she gave it to the dogs and got me a new one. And I'm like thoroughly offended. And so I texted the girl and she was like, oh my gosh, I totally thought that she like wanted a new bed. So I got rid of the old one, gave it to the dogs. So that is one that stands out. One recently, and this has never happened to me, and I thought it was hilarious. We were talking to this horse who is just kind of like hypersensitive to grooming, and it wasn't even really like a nerve issue or anything. It was literally like a space invasion type of thing. Like he was like, I just have a hard time being touched, and if you use like a super soft curry or like those bath mitts or whatever, a lot of horses ask for that actually. Groom me with your hands instead. There's something about a rigid brush that makes us lose touch a little bit with exactly how hard we're grooming them, you know? And then when we try to, this is coming from the horses, when we try to be light with it, then we're tickling them. Like then we're being creepy about it. So like the best brushes actually like are the ones that kind of like go on your, like the little, you know what I'm talking about? Those little rubber ones with the little like nipples on them. They love those brushes.
My mom just got me a pair of those for Christmas, and I always saw them, and I just sort of, you know, I'm like, but I started using them, and it really brought. So I spent a lot of time touching horses, anyways. But like during the brushing, I'm like, what, you know. And so when I started using that, my horses were like, oh yeah, for sure. Like it was like all the way. Like, and so I was like, oh, I really started to think about that. Because it's your hands, you get to adjust, you get to go around the curves of their body, you know, and even through the other stuff I'm doing, I'm like, oh, I can still feel all of these things. And then I have this, you know, I'm like, it's like a twofer. But it was just so weird that like it never occurred to me how like useful and nice that would be compared to just this inanimate object like going all over their body.
Oh, it's so true. And like, I think what's cool about me just being able to talk to a bunch of horses is then I like implement all of that with my own horses. Like I get to hear the stories and then I'm like, oh yeah, screw all these other brushes. But that horse literally, I was like, do you have an old blue brush? And the reason I knew it was old was because he kind of showed it in like this like grayish color. And she was like, yes, it's like 10 years old. And he literally showed an image of her walking over to the barn trash, opening up the lid and throwing it away. I was like, he's saying you should throw that thing away. And I thought that was hilarious because horses will be like, don't use that, or I like this one better, or whatever. And he was like, nah, trash that shit. Like, I do not want that.
That's so funny.
That was hilarious. I'm trying to think if I have anything else. Oh, I have a little pig story. So, I talked to this horse. Someone had me talk to their horse because he all of a sudden started getting like super nervous in his field and he wouldn't go to turnout. Like he was staying in his like run in and like wouldn't go to the back of the property. And she's like, I don't know what changed. Like we can't see anything. And he was like, there's a pig in my field. And she was like, okay, we've been looking for this pig. We don't see anything. We never hear it. We don't like see tracks or anything. And it's funny because I went and met her in person and her dad was there and he's the one that found the pig. And he was like, man, we didn't know what Corinne was doing. We thought she was just crazy talking to some like sorcery lady. But next thing you know, a week later, a pig is in the barn. And I guess it was like a little domestic pig that escaped its property, or it had like a hole in the fence, or I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was coming into the barn and it was coming into his field at night, and he was like terrified by it. And I just thought it was hilarious. They finally ended up catching it. And that's one that I'll always remember. And she likes to remind me too, because she's like one of my regular clients now. And she'll be like, thank God for that pig, or I never would have met you.
Oh, that's so funny. So
Yeah.
do you find that, is it easy for you to connect and hear your own animals really well, or is it something that is more challenging?
It's harder with my own animals, just because like I'm around them all the time. I have like my own like, preconceived thoughts about them.
Mhm.
Kip, he kind of shuts me out. Like he doesn't, unless he needs something, he's like hard to connect with.
Mhm.
My other horses are fairly I feel like they only want to talk to me if they need something. Like
Mhm.
it's not just everyday stuff. Like a lot of times people will ask, they'll be like, "Oh, wow, you talk to animals. It must be great to talk to your animals all the time." And I'm like, "No, it doesn't really work that way. Like I still have the everyday struggles, and yeah,
Mhm.
it's harder."
Yeah, that's what I sort of felt, that only because it sort of seems like that with everything. Like anyone that's in the profession, and then you're doing stuff with clients and then your own horses, people are like, oh, and I'm like, it's so interesting that that's sort of a theme that happens for people with, oh yeah, I struggle with my horses because these are the lessons I'm supposed to be learning from them. So no, they're not going to make it easy on me. Like that's the point, and I think at some level it makes people feel a little bit comforted, like, okay, so you have those too. Like, yes, we're all human being, like everyone's having the same struggle. It's like, it's so much easier for me to work with other people's horses and find the
I
time
think
to
too, yeah, I think we accidentally rush our own horses more than we would a client horse. Like, you know how when you go to a client horse, you like take a couple of deep breaths and like you just feel their energy and you approach them like super nicely. And then I walk into my barn and I'm like, all right, boys, like let's go outside. And I'm like throwing their halter on and like walking them outside. And they're like, so I do think that we forget to slow down because we get comfortable with them. Like it's just like how we interact with people. Like the way that I talk to my husband won't be the way that I talk to someone I've never met before.
Mhm.
So I've actually been really trying to be super mindful of that recently. And just in the way that I interact with my horses, like for the longest time, here's what's funny is they will tell me something and it's almost like I ignore it, not intentionally, but like for the longest time my horses started, not the longest time, but like there was a period of 2 weeks where my horses were having all this gait anxiety, and it's like they were pushing over each other and like trying to bust out of the gate, and I was slipping the halters like over their ears. And I have all of my horses are like pretty tall, and they don't really lower their head. They're just always on top of each other. And they kept saying, we don't really like it that you have to pull back our ears. And I was just kind of like, yeah, like, come on, let me just bring you into the barn, whatever. And I started unlatching their crown pieces and haltering them in a different way, like after 2 weeks of pretending like I couldn't hear them. And because, it's easier if you just undo the throat latch, slide it on over. And now I have no gait anxiety. My horses are perfect. And like, so they probably do talk to me more than I think. And then my human dumb mind gets in the way and is like, no, that can't be.
Yeah, I think that piece is really good for people to hear, because then it's like, well, I don't feel so bad. It's like things are, and I say that too with my stuff, is the way I interact with my horses is much faster. And just in the last like week or two, I've really been more like, why am I like this? Why am I like this? But slowing down with my own horses and recommitting to spending more time with them and backing off the other stuff that I'm doing and actually brushing them and like riding them, like, and carving out the time to do that stuff with them. And I feel like there is a reconnection, because through December and November, it just felt like, okay, out in the pasture, back in their stalls, out in the pasture, back in their stalls. And my excuse and what made me feel better is at least they're out with other horses and they're happy and they're getting all their needs met. But yeah, there was just one morning where I walked in and I was just like, what am I doing? Like, why do I have them then? Like, what am I doing? So I sort of shifted into, I'm going to brush you with my gloves. I'm going to spend the time every day, at least this, and connect with you, and then put you in the pasture if I don't have time.
If like because I will sometimes have this mentality, and I don't know if you're the same way, but I will be like, if, and maybe this is just my old mindset, but if I don't have the time to like specifically work with the horse, I just won't do anything at all. It's like I'll bring him in, put him in a stall, same thing, like just put him away because I'm like, oh, I only have like 10 minutes. I don't have time to do anything with you. But like that's not true. I could totally spend those 10 minutes, you know, like massaging a muscle or, you know, doing something. But it's just funny because I will get into that mindset where I'm like, oh, I don't have time to like do a full ride or a full session. So then like the horse kind of gets put on the back burner. Right. And I feel like a lot of people probably feel that way. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just interesting. And then it's also, I mean, it's good to go, okay, so I'm not, I'm not the only one. But I have heard a lot of professionals in whatever profession they're in within the horses say sort of the same thing. So I will ask one question. Is there like I never know how to word this. Is there a mantra or a question that you ask yourself to kind of keep yourself in check and keep yourself present?
I think I don't really have like a question that I ask myself. It's mostly, I guess I remind myself that like everything is always working out as it should. And I always remind myself that like horses are pure positive energy. Like they're just pure positive beings and non-resistant. And so I think in order to keep myself in check, like if I'm working with them or whatever, I will remind myself, like, this is pure positive energy. They always take the path of least resistance. So like if they're resisting something, there's a reason for that. So that's kind of like my mantra, I guess.
Yeah. Awesome. And so if people want to work with you, where do they find you?
So my schedule stays pretty busy, which is awesome. I think the best place to kind of find me is my Facebook page, Energy Connections by Shaylee, and it'll kind of direct them to my email. That's the best way. Sometimes I miss things that are on Instagram and stuff, but I just have a Facebook, no website, you know. I can't commit to too many things at once because I have a hard enough time sitting down at the computer as it is.
Oh, so good. So is there anything else you feel like you need to say as we end that you didn't get to say? And
the only thing that I would say is like it for people who are like struggling with their horses and who don't really know where to turn next. Like I have people who message me all the time and they're like, I have to get on your schedule. This is an emergency. I don't know where else to go. And I think what's important is like to just ask yourself, have I sat down? Have I like taken some quiet time to think about what my horse might tell me? Have you like looked at past patterns? Have you journaled anything about your horses? Like keeping a journal is so important because this might have been like a pattern that you forgot about and now it's like cropping up again. So I think for people who kind of get into that like panic mode of I don't know where else to turn, you're more powerful than you think. Like everyone has like that intuition and that connection with their animals. And I think they give away some of that power thinking that they can't do it themselves. You know what I mean? So I think it's important to kind of like sit. The easiest thing to do is automatic riding. So like if you look at a picture of your animal, you like sit down and close your eyes and just start writing whatever comes to mind, like whether it makes sense or not. And guaranteed, like the more you do that and the more you practice, the more stuff you'll pick up from your animal, and then it'll kind of help you like link pieces together. So
perfect. Well, thank you so much for hanging out and sharing all of your stories. They're so amazing, and yeah, I'm excited to be able to have you chat with my ponies.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.